Okay, welcome to another event by the DC chapter of the Internet Society. I'm Michael Nelson, one of the people who help organize events like this. I want to start by thanking Microsoft and the folks here on the 11th floor who are hosting us again. Also want to make a plug for the DC chapter. How many are already members of the DC chapter of the Internet Society? As all of you know, I'm sure, the Internet Society is a global organization, more than 100,000 people involved in promoting the growth of the Internet, developing the standards that define the Internet, and helping businesses and public policy makers understanding what's coming so that they can help build a better Internet future. Today's event is a little unusual. This is an audience participation event. We do not have panelists today. We have discussion leaders. To my right are catalysts, people who are going to get the discussion going, but this is really a discussion for all of you about what's going on in Internet governance and specifically what happened last week, a week and a half ago, at the Internet Governance Forum in Istanbul and what's going to happen next. How many people in the room have been to a global Internet Governance Forum meeting? Okay, so you're all going to chime in as well. And you're all part of the conversation here. That you can help everyone else in the room understand what's going on and why these are important events. As you know, a lot of debate right now about where the Internet's going and who gets to control it. Will it be the Chinese government? Will it be Cisco? Will it be Facebook? Will it be users? Or will it be all of the above? And in Istanbul, we had a lot of discussion about the different issues, the different choices that are being made with regard to the future of the Internet. In my spare time, I teach classes on Internet studies at Georgetown. We have a class on what's shaping the Internet, and we go through a number of different hot issues that are being decided right now, whether it's domain names, wireless spectrum issues, cybersecurity, online privacy. All these are issues that were discussed at Internet Governance Forum and more. So what we're going to do is going to start by turning to our discussion leaders who are going to give some, hashtag, yes, David Viorst, a key member here of the chapter, has reminded me the hashtag is ISOCDC. Hashtag, right. Coincidentally, that's also our Twitter handle, and you can find lots of announcements about what's going on there on our website and also on our Facebook page. So let me start. Here we have 3 of our 4 discussion leaders, and they're going to just start by giving a little sense of what they saw, what was new and different. This enterprise, the Internet Governance Forum, has been going on since 2006. When it started in Athens. And our first speaker, Ambassador David Gross, has actually been to each and every one. You are going first. Well, that's because you're the voice of experience. Dick, have you also been to everyone? 7 of the 9. Okay. But Dave can give us a little context, and also, again, share what he saw that was new and different. What was the... We've been having these meetings. We've been having a lot of great discussions. There were 3,400 people in Istanbul. What was important for you? What was new and different, David?
Well, first of all, it's terrific to be back here. It's great to do another ISOC event and appreciate the opportunity to do it. And actually, before I get into anything that's new and different, I just want to break down the numbers that you were saying, over 3,000. According to, at least to the draft chair summary, which is a useful document, somewhat useful document, at least for those of us who are trying to remember what we did for that week, of that about 3,500 people, about 2,400 were on site. So about 2,400 were there, and there was about 1,100, at least they claim, about 1,100 remote participants. So in terms of the things that are slightly different, I would say that the size of the remote participation, but also the quality of the remote participation. I was on some panels, and for years we've been trying to do a better job of getting remote participation as panelists. And ironically, perhaps for an internet-related conference, it always seems to go awry. But at least as far as the ones I was involved in, it seemed to go really quite well. So the technical capabilities continue to improve, and I think that bodes well. It sort of goes back to the Net Mundial as well, it seems, held in April this year, where there was substantial and important remote participation as well. So that I think is not really just a technical issue that is encouraging, but rather is a sort of fairly fundamental one. Because one of the problems about IGF's, for its relatively brief history, but it's true for all these international meetings, has been that the participation's been skewed, and skewed basically to those who in some fashion can show up at the meetings. By allowing for remote participation, it obviously broadens the participation, deepens the conversations, and I think bodes well for future meetings and the like. It's not the same as being there, obviously, but it's at least a step in the right direction. So I think that is clearly one of the real improvements and one of the significant changes that we've been seeing. In terms of sort of overall, I thought it was actually one of the best. I'm always careful to say one of the best because I don't want to offend those who have spent all that time and effort putting together previous Internet governance forums. Having said that, I thought it was particularly good because, again, there was, I think, an increasing diversity of participation. I think I can speak for almost everybody who was there. Having a meeting in Istanbul is a good thing. It's a very nice place to have a meeting. It is, I thought actually one of the things that actually added to it was the fact that there was a counter IGF that was being put on by those who were concerned about free flow of information in Turkey, and the fact that there was a group that was going on and there was a fair bit of shuttling back and forth between the meetings. I thought added a texture and richness to the meetings that was very good. The day zero, which is sort of a relatively new phenomenon, really began in Nairobi with a ministerial, continues to innovate and allow for a sort of a broadening of topics, particularly last minute. I think I should give particular credit to the organizers, including Marcus Coomer and others, for doing a very good job on the net neutrality piece, which was sort of a relatively late add-on, but a very important one, particularly again after Net Mundial. I thought that one had all the earmarks of a potential disaster, but they really did a terrific job. We were able to get a wide variety of views to be expressed in, I thought, a very thoughtful set of presentations and audience participation, showing that really is can be an effective, the IGF can be an effective vehicle for very topical, very controversial policy discussions. And from my perspective, I would say, as always, I learned a lot. Sticking on the net neutrality piece just for a moment, I was particularly taken with an interesting panel that was put together that talked about zero rating, an issue that has some interest here in the United States, for example, but I was really quite taken about how important that set of issues were in the developing world, not surprisingly, in light of the use by many as an access ramp onto the internet, and the views about the role of net neutrality versus zero rating and the ability. So I thought I learned a particular lot from people who are working with those issues in the developing world in ways that I really hadn't fully appreciated just reading about it before.
Okay. Well, I'll turn next to Andrew Mack, who brings a development perspective. He's been consulting as the founder of AM Global Consulting since 2005. Also worked at the World Bank. Very involved in domain names and all sorts of things related to the development of the internet around the world. A lot of work in Africa. And how many? You've been to 7 internet governance forums, so another veteran. So what are the surprises? What was new this time?
Are we on? Good. Okay, well, first of all, thank you. I'd also like to thank Microsoft and everyone for being here. It's a great opportunity. I think it's one of the things that is very important about IGF is to try and share your experiences and to have this be a conversation. So I'm appreciative of the people who took the time, especially late in the day. This was an interesting IGF for me in a lot of ways. And some of the things that were different about it, frankly, were things that I thought were big positives. I thought that that you mentioned the net neutrality piece, and I thought that not only was there good conversation, but it was a relatively civil conversation. I know that in certain of the other IGFs, there's been a little bit more of a feeling of friction between the non-governmental side and the governmental side, between the private sector and others. I thought that this was a relatively harmonious IGF by comparison, and I heard a lot of people talking partnership in ways that I hadn't heard them in the past, which I thought was very constructive. I was surprised, I guess. I'm not surprised, but I found it noteworthy the amount of discussion about two issues. The first was the future of the IGF itself, and I noticed all the people wearing their IGF Support Association pins, right, Marilyn?
Uh-huh.
I've already joined. I joined there on the spot, right? So there was a wide, it was an interesting series of meetings around that. There was a really pretty wide coalition around people who said, IGF is a good thing. We need to keep it in more or less of its current format, and we are willing to put up, to make that happen. I thought that was very constructive. The second thing was the focus on ICANN and what is next for ICANN and what is next for what is next for the IANA contract and all the kinds of things around that. There were a series of meetings at which I thought we were as much at an ICANN meeting as we were at an IGF. We were more likely in Los Angeles than we were in Istanbul. And that was interesting for a couple of reasons in my mind. Number one, because it brought together an awful lot of ICANN insiders and people who care deeply about ICANN and its future. And I thought it was noteworthy what we heard and what we didn't hear. And I think we'll get to that a little bit later, so I'm gonna let that one, leave that one hanging out there. But I thought the amount of discussion of ICANN and the quality of it were both very, very interesting. I think that there were, what was interesting, yeah, David, you mentioned the non-governance forum, and I think it was actually fairly noteworthy, the lack of discussion of a lot of censorship and human rights issues inside the hall. And I think that there were a whole host of reasons for that. This was an IGF that maybe had a smaller number of voices from the Global South than I've seen in some others. I also think that there was perhaps a little bit of a chilling effect. Some of the things that have happened in the relationship between government and the non-governmental sectors prior to IGF. I can't point to any one particular thing that necessarily was the tipping point, but there was, in my mind, it was a relatively unpolitical IGF in that sense. And I think that was frankly a little bit of a miss. I think that there may have been a way to bring more diverse voices into the conversation. Some of the things are obviously the same a lot of the time is you have 3 or 4 panels on the same subject matter, and figuring out which net neutrality panel to go to is always a challenge. But I think that the last thing that I would bring to the fore, which directly relates to emerging markets, and I've got some more notes on emerging markets for later, is I was very, very struck by 2 things. Number one is this ethos of partnership as around emerging markets issues, that we are going to solve our problems together, that it was not a you owe us, or it was not a, it was less about complaint and more about solution than I've ever heard before, which I thought, frankly, was very constructive. And the second thing was this idea that that the solutions are going to come in terms of partnership. And I think that was really very, very impressive. I was on 2 panels aimed at the Global South, one that Marilyn put together for women from the Middle East, and the other one about that was put together by UNECA aimed at Africa. And both of them talked about African entrepreneurs and Middle Eastern entrepreneurs, if it's women, I don't know, working and making money on the web. And I thought that was really very, very important, because in the past, we've had conversations that were largely political or policy or almost philosophical in some instances. Now people are talking about brass tacks. How are we going to make this work for us? So I thought that was new and frankly very encouraging.
Okay. Could I just
Sure.
one thing on the just because many people were there, so I'm sure they'll want to comment too on the discussion about free flow of information. I agree with you. In the hall, I think it was less. On the other hand, Google put on a big tent. that was, to say it was heated, I think was an understatement. And I thought it was both enlightening, entertaining, and very impressive.
Do you want to explain who was speaking?
Well, let's see. We had, it was 3 women versus 1 government guy. The government guy was a senior government official who was trying, I would say, with not a lot of success, to explain why the Turkish government was censoring in the way they were. There was 1 woman who was, if I remember correctly, a parliamentarian, as well as she was also a strong disability advocate. There was an Azerbaijani by birth blogger who lives in Turkey, and another woman who, I'm trying to remember what her affiliation was, but she was also on the free flow of information side. And it was a bloodbath, I would say. That's
It wasn't televised, unfortunately.
well, it was certainly
A lot of
very
people
impressive.
were there, though, yeah.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
no holds barred.
Our third discussion catalyst is Natalie Green, and she is a newbie to IGF, and that's one of the reasons we wanted her on the panel, was to give a newcomer's perspective to this event, and also someone a little younger than some of us on the panel.
Watch it.
Natalie,
I was gonna say.
Natalie is at Public Knowledge, where she is an international policy assistant. Prior to that, she worked on internet rights and internet freedom and human rights at the New America Foundation. And I give it to you. You can't compare it to previous ones, but you can tell us what you found interesting in Istanbul.
Yeah, so as you said, this was my first IGF, and for me, I've been sort of spending the last week and a half having this type of discussion with myself about what I took away from the IGF, some of the questions that I went in with at the IGF, and the future of the IGF. And my background's more in human rights before I got into the internet governance issues. And one of the things that I saw when I was at IGF was the growing importance of human rights, and the growing importance of, or not importance, more of the growing attendance of traditional human rights actors at the IGF. So I can't even count the number of people I met from Amnesty International, from Human Rights Watch, Index on Censorship, a lot of these traditional human rights organizations that have not necessarily been as involved in internet governance in previous years are starting to get involved. And I think this is really important, especially when we talk about things such as, internet governance principles around a human rights framework, to get the involvement from these organizations whose whole mission is human rights. And in conjunction with this, we've all sort of talked about the Ungovernance Forum, and I'm sure later we could probably talk about, whether it was actually effective or impactful and things like that. But I think at least the Ungovernance Forum brought up the issue of how the IGF deals with local context and how the IGF deals with its host country picks. I don't know if this is something that previous IGFs have ever had a similar event, but to me, on the outside looking in, I think at least one positive I took from that was that there's at least this growing discussion of what impact does the IGF have after it leaves that country? Does that actually improve the internet situation in that country, or is it, they're going to go back to the same old things? And I mean, unfortunately, since then, we've seen that in Turkey that there have been some laws passed that sort of show that maybe it isn't having as good of an effect as it should, or as we may want it to. And then the third thing, and I'm speaking more from a personal level, and I guess we could talk about this when we're talking about some of the ways the IGF can improve, is as a, youth person, I think there's a huge gap with youth involvement in the IGF. And user involvement in the IGF, and I think it's something that I hear a lot of people say to me, that they want to get youth more involved, but I don't know if there's actually steps being taken to do that. There's a dynamic coalition for youth that's part of the IGF, but I mean, outside of that, I think a lot of young people don't even know that the IGF is happening, and when I tell my friends, for example, and I tell them the type of issues that are being addressed, they're interested in it, they just had no idea that it existed. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed more.
Okay. Well, let me now turn to the audience, and I'll let those of you who were in Istanbul answer the same question. What was new for you? What was surprising for you? David, do you want to? David is another person who's relatively new to the IGF global scene. He was very involved in IGF USA a couple months ago.
Sure. He was kind of. I can project.
Yeah. For the billions watching online.
Yeah, it was kind of a christening for me, going from the local and doing so much work with the chapter to helping with the IGF USA and then going to the global all within a short time span. I was impressed with how real the debate about ICANN and ICANN accountability and the IANA functions was, and how substantive the issues were, and how that debate is the debate that will actually shape outcomes. I was also really impressed with the kind of electricity and energy surrounding the net neutrality discussions there, and the global kind of energy. There was a real buzz. People were running around, did you hear what they said at this panel and that panel? I even changed my schedule to get to the next one. And it was very helpful hearing kind of some of the different meanings assessed to some of the terms we associate with net neutrality from around the world.
That was definitely one of my takeaways. You mentioned the zero rating issue, and just seeing net neutrality discussed in 5 radically different ways. That was good for me. Okay, were you there? I'm going to people who were there first.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. But I was going to actually, if I could just add on to what Dave said, one of the underappreciated parts, but for those who spend all this time in the MAG, and there are a number of MAG members here, which is greatly appreciated by the host government, was the facility actually worked very well. I was a little confused, I have to admit, at the beginning, but I'm often a little confused at the beginning of these meetings. But it worked very well because the sort of adjunct we're talking about is not only were there good rooms with good acoustics, think back to Azerbaijan where the acoustics were non-existent, but also the way in which the building was laid out allowed for a lot of interaction. You sort of had to cross paths a lot, so it allowed you to see a lot of people and have those follow-up conversations. So I think an underappreciated part of this is the building layout and the work that the host governments put on for these things.
Yeah, I mean.
My only recommendation for future IGFs would be that the workshop room number and the room number were the same.
Right.
It would make it way too early, and I would actually find the room that way.
Very true. Other thoughts from people who were there? Other things that people saw that they want to share? Joe, do you want to? Joe hosted one of the most interesting sessions I was involved in just by accident. He brought about 5 people from Afghanistan and about 5 people from Iraq to learn more about internet policy issues, and he recruited me with the help of Judith Hellerstein to speak to them, and that was absolutely fascinating.
It was for me, and thank you again. And thank you for others like Judith who helped me in Maryland. Since you put me on the spot, I mean, I should say that because my role is bringing others to the IGF, and this is my second I've attended, my third because I didn't go last year, I still feel like I'm both a guide to other people, but also an outsider. And as an outsider, I feel a little disconnected from the actual debates because I don't work with them day to day. And I find the IGF fascinating. I've tried to think of what the analogy is, and the first thing that came to mind was family reunion. Because in my family, we need to have somebody to host it every 2 years instead of every year. Somebody volunteers. You go to that place, and you get there, you're not quite sure what you're there for. You're meeting people, and you're learning some things, and by the time it's over, you feel like part of your family again. And I think that's consistent with the IGF, and it's part of my role of bringing the folks from Iraq and Afghanistan, and I hope from other countries, that we're trying to all be part of the global internet family. And it doesn't always make a lot of difference which workshops you're going to, which has to be important because so many workshops do overlap and going on at the same time. Organizationally, it remains a mess. And I talked to some other folks about this, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it probably could be more shaped up, but it has to do with the stakeholder, the multi-stakeholder way it's put together. A lot of the conversations, I didn't know where they were going, and maybe that's okay. The folks that I sponsored, though, were very happy to be there to engage in those conversations and to be a part of them, and I hope took away of greater understanding. And in some ways, I'd analogize the IGF to a retreat. Our office is going to have a retreat in 2 weeks. And you go, you talk about issues. Again, you may not realize what the importance of any given session is, but this is not a decision-making event. It is not one where immense decisions of immense importance are made, but it's a chance to work through the issues. And I think that's really the value that I'm perceiving with it.
Yeah, one example from your session, one of the people from Iraq said, we're dealing with mobile money. We're trying to figure out what to do, and they have all these different people coming in with solutions on mobile money. And just a 2-minute conversation about what's going on in Kenya with M-Pesa and some of the other case studies enabled him to have a much better idea of where to look for good ideas and who to talk to later on in the week. And that's the kind of many-to-many communication that I think the IGF specializes in. That was many-to-many going on all the time. And I think that's right, David. I think the fact that the layout was so distributed, and every time you went from one workshop to another, you had to walk through the lunchroom where everybody was waiting or having tea, meant you could catch up with people. Okay, Marilyn Cade. Now, Marilyn Cade is Ms. IGF, both global and also IGF USA. If you don't know Marilyn, meet her. She'll help you write a proposal for next year's IGF, so you can go to Brazil.
Thank you, Mike. So a couple of things that are different, and I have been at all of the IGFs. I was a first-time MAG member. Although I've participated in all of the IGFs, I've helped to organize main sessions, I've helped to organize workshops and to catalyze others. This past year was my first year as a MAG member. It was quite a learning experience. So here's my announcement. The IGF is a miracle. Let's keep it alive. Lots of water, lots of love. It is undergoing dramatic change, and that's one of the undercurrents that was going on at this IGF. I was on the CSTD working group on improvements to the IGF Commission for Science and Technology, Commission on Science and Technology for Development.
And MAG?
Under the United Nations?
Under UNCTAD, under the United Nations. The improvements are blessed by the UN General Assembly, and that's important to understand because that means that all of the governments who might have reservations about the IGF are embracing these improvements. One of the things that's in paragraph 72 in the Tunis Agenda, which we often forget, is a call for us to take the outputs and the messages that come out of the IGF into other fora. And that is one of the things that's really being worked on. We had 5 best practice forums at this IGF. I would say they're in a range of progress. One was on IXPs, one was on child online protection. But the point is there are best practices that are being developed. Those groups are going to continue to work. They only had 7 or 8 weeks to work. And that work is going to then turn into a tangible output. Not a negotiated outcome, but an output. There's a number of other things that are going on that are really going to, I think, improve the IGF. Each host has the choice of whether or not to print an agenda. Printed agendas don't work very well, and I think that was very frustrating to many of the people, that particularly when the internet didn't work very well. But I think we learned some lessons. One of the things that I would say about Turkey is that I went to Tunisia with Ambassador Gross, Dick Beard, a number of other people here. Bloggers were being jailed. The way that civil society got to hold a meeting is, I think it was the German government escorted them in his car through into the building. Today, Tunisia is standing up and saying, we're trying to make progress in this space. Now, that was 10 years ago, right? So I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but I do think that Turkey, because of the economic implications, potentially can come closer than perhaps some of the other governments will. And I think also the financial commitment Turkey made to hosting was the highest of any that's been made to date. They put their name out there. I think it's up to all of us to try to work with them, and that, I think, is a key that we need to keep following up on. I helped to bring, to advise the Women's Alliance on Virtual Engagement. That's 40 Arab women entrepreneurs who use social media that is illegal in their countries to do social, economic, and cultural change. This is their second time coming. They hold side events, and they did a workshop. And I want to thank Andy and Jane Coffin for co-moderating. There was a new group that came, the Arab Internet Freedom Alliance, 20 business people from the Arab states who will continue to come. This is the kind of convening that if we can keep bringing the human rights folks, Natalie, these other groups, we're going to make the IGF the place to come. My final comment is going to be about the important value of the high-level meeting on day 0. Some of us work very, very hard to make sure that the government people come, and then we integrate them into workshops. And I want to thank the U.S. government for exceeding the quota we gave them this year.
Thank you very much, Marilyn.
Actually, if you don't mind, let me just pick up on what Marilyn was just saying, because since we have some terrific representatives of the U.S. government here, we had, what is it, 36, 35?
This was to make up for last year when they had the government shut down and
Well,
no one could go to Bali.
We had people there last year too, but yeah, but we had 35, 36, something in that neighborhood, a large contingent
And then a lot of people local, too.
of U.S. government people coming from Washington and elsewhere. Very impressive, and I will say that Undersecretary Novelli was there, and she gave what I thought was a very good and well-received speech. I have to say she got, I think, the only ovation before she gave her speech, because she was the first woman to give a speech at the, and I think that was very, obviously it was very noted, and for a community that is very supportive of gender equity and so forth, the fact that we had a very the senior U.S. government official was a woman endorsing the IGF in the strongest possible terms, I thought was extraordinarily important and very well received.
Okay. For me, the most interesting thing this time was just how many different groups were riding on the IGF. You know, each year more and more people have organized things around the IGF. But this year, as you mentioned, we had the Internet Ungovernance Forum, which was an academic group all the way across town, but they drew about 200 people to a very interesting session on internet censorship in Turkey. We have GigaNet, which is an academic group that's been meeting for many years, the day before IGF, but we also had the Brazilians organizing a meeting to sort of start talking about their vision of multi-stakeholder decision-making, and in some ways talking about what they want to do next year at the Internet Governance Forum in Brazil. I mean, just all these different things. And Joe's group we already mentioned, but you could go down and pop your head into a lot of different rooms and find all these side meetings going on. And they were much smaller. Often they weren't webcast, but they were getting stuff done on specific problems, highlighting interesting opportunities. And I think that's the most interesting thing for me, that this has become such an established institution that people are tying their success to it. We can talk later about what's going on at the national and local level, because that's the other big development, I think, that there was so much talk this year about how we can build on the spirit of the IGF and do things elsewhere around the world, either at the national level or the regional level, to get people talking across the different boundaries. So business people talking to academics, talking to advocacy groups, talking to techies, talking to users. I think that was all very healthy. So now a tougher question here. What was most troubling? Did you see anything that you wish you hadn't seen? That things were not working quite the way you wish they were. For me, there was one moment. I forgot to bring this. There was a brochure. It's actually a one-page flyer, and it said the free internet is dying in Turkey, and it had a cartoon of the Turkish equivalent of the NSA and the Turkish equivalent of the FBA.
One side by side.
Yeah.
I saw that on the street. I took a picture of it because
But I was sitting having coffee with somebody, and this very furtive-looking man with a leather jacket came in, and he started putting them on all the tables. And 3 minutes behind him, these two guys in blue security coats started coming around and picking them all up. In a few
So it was
cases,
an efficient IGF is what you're saying.
It was
So it was an efficient IGF is what you're saying.
Yes,
That's-
it was in a
No
few
litter.
cases taking them away from the people who were reading them. So there was definitely sort of an effort to make sure that the Turkish government did not look bad. But the fact was there were a couple sessions, particularly on the last day, on human rights, and they were well attended. They were not main sessions, but 100 people in the room talking about censorship globally, and several people from Turkey talking about what was going on there. But I thought that was actually healthy. Troubling things. What troubling? The troubling thing for me was that the police were so good at picking up the brochures. Yes.
That's not the police. The UN has a rule. Those materials can be handed out in the booths, but they cannot be put out in the public spaces. And so, this happened in Baku as well. That's the UN rule, and it has nothing to do with the IGF.
Okay, those were UN. That was the blue UN uniforms. Okay. Well, anyway, they were very efficient. Okay, so what did you see that was troubling, David?
Well,
anything going the wrong
we're
way?
not troubled by that. Actually, I don't know if there was anything that I found particularly troublesome. I mean, obviously you always hear arguments that you have to shake your head at occasionally, but that's not an IGF. That's just the world. That's fine. Actually, I would say one other thing that I thought was really quite a great testament to the MAG, people like Marilyn and others who put it together, that was different than we had before was the extraordinary attendance at the main sessions. In the past, that's been a real struggle. That we have these plenary sessions in essence, and you have a lot of workshops. Workshops are always well attended by aficionados of that particular issue. But often, if you wanted to have a private conversation and not be seen, you'd go to where the main sessions are, and there would be nobody there. This time, you had trouble sometimes getting a seat. I mean, they were full the whole time. And it was a testament both to the quality of the panels and the groups put together, quite large. The subject matter, obviously. The audience allowed for audience participation, which I thought went very well. I think sometimes they didn't have to be 3 hours. I know on behalf of some of the participants that was probably longer than physically they were really capable of holding out. But that's a minor piece. I would say the only thing that's sort of troublesome, and I have to be careful how I say this, is I am very pleased we're going back to Brazil next year. We had one that was very controversial and very difficult in Rio. Mm-hmm. I think it was, the third one or something like that early on. I'm always happy to go back to Brazil. I think that will be very good. I'm troubled because of the location, which I understand is a lovely place, so it's not a criticism of any part of Brazil, but when you talk about trying to get people to attend, and particularly if we're talking about people who don't have a lot of economic support to go, young people and so forth, having it in a place that it does not have a lot of non-stops from the rest of the world, including from the United States as far as I can tell, no less elsewhere, will be, I think, a challenge for many people how to get there without having to spend too much time getting there and too much money.
Well, since one of the hidden agendas is always to sell hotel rooms, this is part of the effort to get you to stop somewhere else in Brazil for a few days before you go on to the resort town.
Perhaps we'll go back to Bali then.
Okay. So, Andrew?
David, I think I'm going to be a little bit less diplomatic. I think having it at a place that people can't get to, on the one hand, efficiently, and on the other hand, saying you're really encouraging everyone to participate, somewhere between those two, there's a lack of overlap. And I don't know how permanent their decision is, but when I was looking, people asked me, because I've spent a lot of time working in Brazil, where João Pessoa, I think it is called, is and how one would get there. And I had to look it up. And I've been to Brazil more than a dozen times. So, for what that's worth, they didn't have any World Cup games there. So it's got to be at least second tier. Right. And just in terms of logistics, I'm sure it's a lovely place, but why not have it in a place where people can get to relatively easily, and then allow them to go special junket off to the beach in wherever. I had one moment where I thought there was a little bit of a disconnect that I'm not completely surprised by, but did provoke an awful lot of conversation. And that was during the ISOC town hall. And I was very, very impressed on some level. There was a great deal of concern about how fast the pace of change was with discussions that.
No, there was an ISOC town hall.
Was it ISOC town hall? It was an early morning meeting where the ICANN president got up and spoke.
ICANN, right. That was the ICANN town hall.
That's what I thought. Yeah, the ICANN town hall. And Fadi got up and said, we have heard from different parts of the community. My impression is that the feedback that we have gotten is that we're moving too fast on the pace of change, and we recognize that we need to slow it down. And that was literally up and down in 2 minutes. I thought that was in some ways very rare to see the CEO of a major organization speak in that way, and I thought that was very, very encouraging. And then there were some presentations afterwards that basically said we have all of these different accountability mechanisms and we don't necessarily think we need any more. And so somewhere between the two sides, I think that there's a little bit of a disconnect. And that was a topic of conversation for a lot of people who are ICANN regulars and who are concerned about the pace of change. And I hope perhaps between now and Los Angeles, but certainly in the near future, we can get closer to on the same page, because I think that the desire is there, but I think we're maybe reading the signals slightly differently.
Just for my interest, how many people here do go to ICANN meetings on a regular basis? Okay, so we've got about a quarter of the people here.
And that
know how to spell
was
IANA.
in and of itself very interesting to see to what extent there was a lot of discussion of ICANN at IGF, which is really the first time that I have seen a real lot of deep dive discussion.
Well, it's a case study.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it didn't exist in the past, but it was much more so than I'd seen in the past.
Yeah.
The other thing about it, you mentioned youth, and I wanted to just flag that because I think that there are a lot of groups that are increasingly showing up. Youth was one, the disability community was another, people focused on women's issues was a third. And what I think we're missing is an ability to try to bring those voices a little bit more front and center into the conversation. I spent half a day talking with Eric Loeb's son Eli, who was one of the youth participants, and his feeling was, this is really great stuff, but you invited us into the conversation at the last minute. So literally, the youth voices became part of the broader conversation only on the second half of the last day, and you know, that's a bit of a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Natalie, anything that troubled you?
I mean, I wouldn't use the word troubled necessarily, but actually he took my exact point.
Sorry.
Which is, no, it's okay, which is when I was talking to other people, other youth participants, there was that common feeling of like, okay, we're involved, but like we don't really know anything that's going on. We don't feel like we can engage in the major workshops and main sessions because we don't necessarily have the experience in this and we don't know who to talk to. And granted, part of that is just like things that you're going to learn the more that you go. But I would agree that I think there needs to be more of a push to engage youth earlier in the process and to also engage them outside of the dynamic coalition on youth.
Mm-hmm. Okay, other things troubling? Okay, who else? Okay, so.
Two things. First is a quick one. The session on the Net Mundial initiative went on all day. I think if they didn't close down...
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if they didn't close down the venue, it would still be going on.
You mean the fact that we had a one-day session to talk about a two-day meeting?
Yeah.
It's a remarkable ratio.
Yeah, and I showed up for a segment of it, and they were running 3 hours late.
Yeah.
But more importantly, I went to the session on ICANN and privacy. It was basically about the Who Is registry, and I completely respect the European significance placed on privacy, and I understand how in non-democratic states anonymity can be important for websites. But in the United States, there was no representation of a perspective that we have in the United States that having the Who Is and having to register websites creates a certain level of accountability. And somewhere in that debate, I think those two interests need to be balanced somewhat more than just overwhelmed with concerns on one side of it.
Okay.
Yeah. My name is Safile, a student of DeVry University in Arlington, Virginia. I'm from Sierra Leone, Freetown, West Africa. This question is for Andrew Mark. I want to know how ISOC will bridge the digital gap for the continent of Africa and the rest of the world. Now, the internet has played a pivotal role in the world, but the continent of Africa, in terms of internet, is poor, totally poor. And you have worked, as you have said, you have worked in the continent of Africa. So I want how the internet society globally can help the continent of Africa. A few minutes ago, I talked with Mike. Like my country, Sierra Leone, I was a teacher back home 13 years ago, teaching chemistry geography. And I have to thank the people and government of the United States for me to come over here. And I'm in an IT world. So I see how the internet can play a pivotal role to bridge that digital gap.
So if I can add to your question, you ask about the Internet Society, but I think why don't we broaden it and ask about the Internet Governance Forum and the community that was represented there. Andrew, if you want to take that, is there what good ideas did you hear in Istanbul?
A really quick one. I actually was privileged to speak at the IGF in Abuja, in Nigeria, a couple of months prior to IGF in Istanbul.
This was the regional?
This is the regional IGF.
African
and it brought
or
together,
East
it
African?
brought together all of the regional African leaders, continent-wide. And a couple of things that I can tell you to take away. First of all, that it is really noteworthy, the amount of participation of Africans in the internet governance world by comparison to almost any other region in terms of its growth. Unbelievable. The number of Africans that you see on a regular basis, the number of people who are repeat, who are repeat attendees, people whose level of knowledge is quite high, people who are through their participation making African issues and developing country issues much more central to the discussion. I think all of that stuff is to be complimented and is really fairly noteworthy. If you look at all the other regions, they are increasing in their participation, but Africa has really just jumped leaps and bounds. In terms of what we saw at the Internet Governance Forum in Abuja, but also the conversations that we had in Istanbul, what you're seeing is that a lot of the problems that are being faced by Africa are actually being addressed by Africans right now. Issues around power, issues around the pipe, the landing of undersea cables, issues around people, those are all, and training, those are all happening right now. Two big issues where I think there's still work that needs to be done are around payments. Can people make money on the internet? And around policy. Do we have the policies in place across the region that will allow people to actually move this thing forward in the way that people want? You only need to look at the rise of the cell phone in a lot of parts of the continent to know just what's possible. 15 years ago, there were 20,000 cell phones in Nigeria. Today, there are 165 million. And many of them are web-enabled, and most of them will be web-enabled in a very short period of time if they're not already. So we're talking about a tremendous, tremendous engine for growth. We've just got to get ourselves organized. And I think Africa is actually doing a fabulous job, just needs to keep going and to happen faster.
So, David, do you want to add to the solutions for Africa?
Yeah, well, I don't know about solutions for Africa. It's far be it from me to sort of, I guess, say too much about that. But I would, in terms of the IGF, I would say sort of the good news and bad news. The good news is if you look at, for example, the chair's summary, which is an interesting document, as I said, for what it includes and what it does not include. The only of the two things that are mentioned for day 3, one of which is the African Declaration of Internet Rights and Freedom. So that's on the good side. Clearly, it was announced there, got a lot of visibility, reflected in the draft chair's report. As Marilyn talks about, this is, in theory, going to be used going forward. Dick Beard and I have talked a lot about sort of the statistics of these things. It's, it's a fascination because you can learn a lot by looking carefully at some of the numbers. We talked a little bit about the online participation at the meeting. Far and away, the largest number of participants were from the host country. That's not real news, but it was a very significant number. It was 745 according to their statistics. Only 190 from Africa. Now, Eastern Europe had 134, so one could compare and so forth. And I was going to say Latin America and the Caribbean had 150, also slightly less. What I was really noticeable about who was absent was the Middle East and Asia. If you think about their the participation on the internet and how very, very thin their participation at the IGF, it was, in my mind, very notable. So I think it's a mixed thing. And looking ahead again, without trying to beat up on Brazil's choice of venue, my guess is, if I were to project it, it'll be very hard for many Africans You had 190 coming to a relatively easy to get place. Istanbul has nonstop service to much of Africa. As I said, it's hard to find nonstop service anywhere to the city we're going to be in about a year.
And it's pretty hard to be a remote participant if you're in Asia and you're
Time
11
difference
or
is quite a
12
challenge.
hours
Yeah.
off,
There
waking
is
up
one-
at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Mike, there's one other piece which I think is important, which is the attitude of the host government around visas. Because there were a number of people that I talked to who said, I would like to go, I have financing to go, but I can't in the timely manner get the visa approved. And so I just throw that out as something that, as we're looking forward to the next round of IGFs, and Brazil is probably better than many, but we want to be sensitive as much as possible to that.
Yeah, there was a question
So
there as well.
is Canada in November? Is that the plan? Okay.
Canada, November, freezing
Back in the
down.
very back.
Hi.
And if you can remind us who you are?
Yeah. Hi, Linda Kinney from the MPA. So this was my first IGF, but I wanted to build on one of the comments about extending IGF and IGF issues to these local countries. One thing I was very impressed about this time around, and I credit the MAG with this, is dedicating several workshops to local content. And one of the things we've learned is that by generating more local content in these emerging economies, it does in fact generate and push broadband out to these communities, and then again promotes economic development. So there were a number of workshops, and I think what was nice about it is it really brought together partnerships. So whereas we represent the American content industry, we were able to talk a lot to these other producers in Africa, Nollywood in particular. The local Turkish producers came for the first time, and we talked to them, and we're starting a lot of cultural exchanges, skills exchanges, training, hiring directors, producers, actors in these local communities in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. And a lot of people want to see their local language and their local culture. So it's a great way to bring together both the local community and reflect the local culture and language, and also have a mixture of content so you can have both international content and local content, of which the local content piece has been missing in lots of regards. So this was a way we could work together again as a partnership. Just one more. I think the low point for me, on the other hand, was some of the old rhetoric that did come into this meeting. On the one hand, we were working really well, and lots of people were talking about ways to partner and help support and develop these, the internet. And then there was also the old rhetoric that came in, and there was a suggestion from somebody in the audience that that WIPO be dismantled, and that.
Just in case somebody doesn't know what WIPO is.
Oh, sorry, the World Intellectual Property Organization. And so, look, I don't know how many people are fans of WIPO. Probably not everybody. And certainly there's no perfect organization or institution. And we have issues with WIPO, but I think that it's a lot healthier in this forum to come and talk about partnerships and how to work together rather than trying to be divisive. So,
Any additional comments on content?
We've got a content guy right there.
Okay.
I am a content guy, David Hughes, RIAA. But mine was following up on David's point, where he was surprised that the U.S. view on who was not represented. Well, I went to a number of panels, and I felt that in an effort to represent a diverse multi-stakeholder group, they were forced to choose people who were not experts in that area. And that was quite frustrating for me as a participant to see people up there, for example, talking about copyright, something near dear to my heart, where 5 of the 6 people are not really experts. And when I talked to the convener, they said, well, we'd love to have you, but we already have a content person from North America. Do you know anybody from Africa? And it's like, well, we can start looking, but I'm not sure. Maybe in this case we would, So that was one of my concerns.
I'm glad you hit on that, because that's actually one of the things that troubled me most, was that getting the sense that the multi-stakeholder model and the need for multi-stakeholders trumps everything else. Well, and it's really interesting because there's a sense that, okay, if we get people from all these different groups, from academia, from corporate, from government, from techie community, that if we all come together, we can solve all our problems. And that's the phony multi-stakeholder model. There is this idea, and it's part of what Brazil is pushing. There's this idea that we just need to have these really big meetings and we'll cover the whole spectrum and we'll get all the multi-stakeholders together and we'll magically come up with the answer. The real power of the internet is that it's a distributed, networked model, and we have hundreds of different groups that come together, often pulling the expertise from whatever stakeholder group they're from. We do try to keep this process open so that a lot of different voices can be heard, but at the end of the day, these decisions, whether it's the World Wide Web Consortium making decisions about browser standards, or an IEEE committee making some decision about frequency allocation, and some other group doing privacy. At the end of the day, it's all these different groups scattered around. And I saw a tension in Istanbul between the people who wanted to, override that. And let's start pulling these big meetings together because we're going to supervise all this chaotic stuff that's been going on so successfully for 25 years.
I'm a big fan of it, hearing everybody's voice. But when it comes to the actual consensus decision making, I think we should defer to experts in these areas. And there are people, whether they're academic experts or from commercial interests or civil society, but there's this desire to be so diverse as to anybody with an opinion should be part of the decision process. That's a little frustrating.
As I say, this was the tension I saw as well. And Marilyn, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm a MAG member, so is Mike. I think that I would suggest, David, that we might think about this perhaps as feedback to the MAG, and we have talked about having an expert track, as well as having roundtable approaches where people can, I might say, share their opinions as opposed to their expertise. And we experimented with some of that, but maybe one of the things that Mike and I might take away from this, and other MAG members, I think Liesl is here and will be at the debriefs as well, is let's think more about different approaches and different tracks. I'm not sure that you can have true user engagement and limit the discussions only to experts, but there may be a way for the MAG to think more creatively about how to make sure the diversity of voices comes in. I wanted to say something about something that is worrying me. So, for instance, at this IGF, we had the Deputy Director General from UNESCO for the first time. Big step forward. We've always had staff. This is a big step forward. And he is from Zimbabwe, I believe. We also had the Commission on Science and Technology for Development for the first time, and we had the chair hosting a public outreach meeting. Big step forward. What didn't we have? The Deputy Secretary General of the ITU, and this has been going on for the last 3 meetings, the Deputy Secretary General of the ITU showed up on day 0, left on day 1, and we had relatively junior people there, including on the main session that I organized. And so I am seeing the other UN agencies embracing the IGF and stepping up to it, and I'm seeing the ITU not showing up. And I know we're being webcast, and I am saying this very clearly. Because, yeah, my name is Marilyn Cade.
This is a very inside joke, but the last day they had an open mic and asked, what can we do to make the IGF better? And somebody gave this vehement request that everybody stand up and spell their name.
Because we transcribe things, it's important that people know who's speaking. So that was the reason for that. I just wanted to go on to say that the other thing that worried me is I felt a little too net mundial. It wasn't as bad as the situation in Bali when there were all these side meetings dealing with the Montevideo statement, come out of your workshop, come to my private meeting. But we had an all-day meeting that was pretty much cooked by the people. It was day zero, but it was pretty much cooked, and the business people that I knew who were able to go really felt that the diversity of voices was not welcomed from business. Business embraced the Net Mundial meeting in Brazil with some concern. We did a lot of work so that we could participate actively and contribute, but it is, we were very cautious about negotiated documents. So we had that, and then we had a lot of aspirational statements, and I'm not saying they came from Brazil, but a lot of aspirational statements that we should adopt the approach we took with Net Mundial and impose it on the IGF. That was a very resource-intense process. Business put together a small team that was regionally diverse and held weekly conference calls over a period of months. I'm very concerned that there's a real expectation that we're going to have a Net Mundial IGF as opposed to embracing the principles or the learning, but making sure we stay consistent with the bottom-up approach to planning the IGF.
I just add one thing to what I mean, what you say makes sense. One of the things that I heard a lot was different interpretations of what Net Mundial meant. And for me, one of the concerns that I have going forward is that Net Mundial is kind of a box into which everyone can put their hopes and aspirations. The danger with that is that we're all going to come out at the back end with completely different visions of what we're looking at, what we're talking about. And the mushier it is, the harder it's going to be for people to feel satisfied. So I think that the vagueness of the Net Mundial process and meeting and all that kind of stuff, we've kind of reached a point where that can only guide us so much. And I really was surprised, frankly, by the extent of how different everyone's interpretations of that meeting were and what came out of it.
We do have a couple of U.S. government representatives. Do they want to say anything about what Net Mundial means to them? I won't point them out.
Yeah, I mean, we are very supportive of what happened at Net Mundial and so the meeting in Sao Paulo. The outcomes were, in our perception, exceptionally positive. We had a broad endorsement for the multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance. We had support endorsement for the IGF, and also an endorsement of the IANA transition.
So we need to do it again.
Well, no, but so we were very, very happy about it. But it was something that we think marked an important inflection point. But that doesn't mean that we have to redo Net Mundial every year or that we have to apply Net Mundial to everything. We are committed to the IGF, and we like the way the IGF exists now. We like the fact that the MAG works in a bottom-up process, in a bottom-up way, and we really want that to continue. So Net Mundial was great. It is what it is, but we don't have to apply it to everything in the world.
Thanks. The only thing I would add to that, oh, hi, I'm Liesl Franz, also with the State Department. The only thing I would add is that, we are also committed to all the efforts to improve the IGF itself, the way it works, the things that you guys have talked about participation and innovative workshop development, bringing more people to the IGF, making sure that the outputs are then distributed and discussed in other forums. So we are committed to that too, but that's the only thing I would add to Andrew's remarks.
Mike, this might be a good time to note, sort of looking ahead.
That was my next question.
As many people probably already know, but it's probably worth noting, that the issue of the IGF renewal and what will happen, I think as a practical matter, will be decided in the second half of next year as part of the WSIS Plus 10 review being conducted by governments in New York and negotiated as part of the review of the Tunis agenda. It'll undoubtedly be part of the negotiations about where we go collectively by governments and by others, and what sort of input the private sector, civil society, academics, and others will have will be at least through their national delegations, but it may be a very much of a non-net mundial set of negotiations.
Okay, so before we go on to that, which is a big 15-minute conversation, let me go to Judith.
Yeah, hi, Judith Helsing. We've been having online a very robust discussion on surveillance, privacy, digital security. We have people from Turkey, and India, other parts of Asia and US, all talking about these issues. But one of the other questions they had is they want to know what kinds of approaches are being considered to facilitate online debate and priority ordering. And how can online observers engage with proposition initiatives beyond like these streams? And I guess one of the ways that they can is joining the best practices forums that Marilyn mentioned earlier. That's a really way of getting involved in setting these discussions. And they're linked onto the page. But there's a lot of other issues and who's an expert, who's not an expert, and how can everyone participate on an equal footing. And that's some of the issues that the best practices forums are really looking at, and hopefully they're going to get going more in the next year because they just started. So.
Yeah, I think the best practices forum is one of the most important long-term impacts that this whole process can have. In some of the earlier IGF meetings, they had the dynamic coalitions, and several of them were not dynamic and they were barely coalitions. They just didn't get a critical mass. And in the worst case, I think some of them didn't get enough people to even really have a discussion. In the second worst case, they got a bunch of people who all had the same opinion, right, and they didn't have much of a discussion. So much better are these best practices forums, which are focused on a specific issue. They're getting people together to actually determine what can be done in the national level and the regional level to make the internet better. And I have great hope for those efforts because a lot of resources are going into them. So that's the first place that people can go to get engaged and be part of the process. The other place, of course, are these national and local Internet Governance Forum meetings. We had an incredibly successful event that many of us helped organize a couple months ago. Really interesting discussions on what Internet governance means here in the U.S. And we tackled a lot of the tough issues from net neutrality to privacy. And those discussions in many ways are closer to the national government policymakers who are making a lot of the key decisions on the future of the Internet in their country. At the end of the day, it's great to have international meetings and talk global issues, but a whole lot of things happen locally, whether it's censorship in Turkey, unfortunately, or African projects that are tying together villages that have never been connected to anything. You know, the good news, it's happening at the national and the regional level. So get involved. If you're watching now, tune in to your local Internet Governance Forum. Other suggestions for where we need to go next? I think you posed, there's the question of whether the UN lets us go forward. But there's also the question about what we want to do.
The terms and conditions will
be. Well, what do we want to push for? What do we want to make happen? I love the idea of getting more international remote participation. As somebody who's only been to 2 IGFs in person, but has been a remote participant, I think that's great. And a lot of money could be saved if we could bring more people in for a couple sessions remotely and not expect them to show up for the whole 5 days. Other ideas? Any other things that you've mentioned? Youth, remote. Okay.
A couple of things just jump into my mind. One of them is that I think that I really would put a big strong plug in for the regional and national IGFs, especially the regional ones. I think that in a lot of parts of the world where the net is newer and our concept of human interaction over the net, whether it's be human rights or intellectual property protection or whatever, is newer. There is a tremendous value in bringing people together because you do bring together the people who really matter. And it is in some instances really cost prohibitive for them to come to Bali or a João Pessoa or wherever it is we're going next, as much as that might be a cool place to go. I think also that there's a tremendous demonstration effect of the multi-stakeholder model itself that for the broader society. I I mean, if you think about it, this thing that we're doing, the way that the whole internet governance world works, that it encourages the participation of all the different parties, that it gives them, if not an equal voice, then at least a listening voice and an important a chance at the microphone, I think in a lot of places is really important. And as a lot of countries move away from a more state-dominated social organization toward a more multi-stakeholder, more government as a provider of service to its people kind of organization, I think that the IGFs can actually play a wider role than just internet governance.
I think that's so incredibly important. The demonstration effect, the test case. Okay, introduce yourself, sir.
Stephen Balcom with the Family Online Safety Institute.
How many have you been to?
I've only been to one, the one in Rio, which was a lot of fun.
Rained every day, though.
No, I did. And my colleague, Dave Miles, has been to 3 others. I've actually asked him to stop going because we just simply can't afford it. And that's a huge issue in terms of NGOs' participation. And I want to make a radical suggestion. I completely understand why IGF has been all over the place in different parts of the world. Why don't we host it here? Why don't we host it in Washington, D.C. or New York and ask trusts, foundations, our own government to create a very large bursary, particularly for NGOs and particularly for youth, to come to Washington and New York to attend and participate and really do the...
You want to take care of the visas?
I know the U.S. government is now leaving to go...
Right. Should I pick this up on the...
Visas, schmeezes, or Canada. Let's not forget our Canadian friends. I understand it's November, but I think that it could have a pretty radical... I think it could stir things up in a very positive way.
Well, it's all about money. Okay, introduce yourself.
Hi, David Marar, research student, research assistant, a PhD student at George Mason School of Public Policy, and I'm actually researching multi-stakeholderness. So for me, what you said was fantastic. But what's very interesting about the IGF as a construction is that it has no actual, let's say, deliverable. Right? There's no governance in the Internet Governance Forum because there's nothing that comes out of it and that goes to the UN, and then the UN says, hey, everybody's going to do this. So then I think that as much as it's a fantastic forum, maybe it'd be interesting to sort of push a little bit more on the. There's one of the points, and I can't believe I'm blanking right now and everybody's staring at me, but there's one of the important points of what the IGF is supposed to do, and that one point says that the IGF should then give more notes and should. I forgot the word, but it's basically a different way of saying, hey, you guys can give some suggestions on actual governance. Do you think that should be a way forward to push a little bit more for the IGF to be an actual governance structure as opposed to just a fantastic forum to get everybody involved and get everybody talking on the same sort of equal footing? Thank you.
I have a real interesting and very immediate answer to that. No. One of the best tweets of the 5 days, and I was tweeting away, was, is the IGF a meeting about the internet? Is it a meeting about internet governance? Or is it a meeting about the governance of internet governance? And about a third of the sessions were that latter category, was how do we organize, how do we talk about these different issues? And some cases, building new structures to solve problems that don't exist. And so I heard some of the same discussion, though. People thinking, well, there isn't a big body taking care of the problem, so let's start building a big body. It used to be that we talked about the Bretton Woods of the internet. That's what we need. After World War II, we solved our global financial problems by building one big international monetary structure. And people talked about that. You heard that a lot when you were ambassador for cyberspace.
I try not to hear that very often.
Right. Well, we tried to debunk it. But now we don't hear about Bretton Woods. We hear about Net Mundial.
Well, and I'm a former World Bank staffer, right? So one of the Bretton Woods institutions. And I can tell you there are limitations to that model, lots of them. Look, I mean, the short answer I would agree is no. There are more things that we can take from the experience, but one of the great values of the IGF is that it is a laboratory. It's a safe space where people can talk to each other about things that are on their minds without the pressure of coming out with a yes or a no or some sort of a negotiated anything. And I think we lose that at our peril. Right now, there is nothing that does what IGF does, which is clearly of value to the international community, and I don't think we want to mess that up.
I call it peer-to-peer governance. You have all these different people who are making various decisions about how their institution, how their government, how their business is going to use the internet or push it in a certain direction. And they're learning from all the peers, all the other people who have knowledge that they can learn from. And that is so much different than the Bretton Woods model, where all the expertise is up on high and they write these documents that tell everybody what to do. That's just that's so 20th century, Okay, Marilyn.
I like the 20th century, by the way.
I'm going to both agree with Mike and disagree with him. That's hard to do, right? We can do a lot better at capturing messages from the dialogues, and we can do a lot better at figuring out when a topic is actually mature, because we have talked about it for 7 meetings in a row. We used to call the ICANN issue critical internet resources, but it was ICANN. And, I think one of our big challenges, frankly, is money. That's why I said that the IGF is a miracle. There are times when Changatai does not get paid. Changatai is the secretariat. He now has 1 full-time assistant. He supervises interns and fellows. And that's how we build. And imagine what a miracle it is that we put on this international forum, which is being attended by ministers. This is a miracle. So one of our challenges right now from the MAG is to figure out how we capture the messages. What justifies being a peer-reviewed message? Is it just something that comes up in a meeting, or is it something that gets kicked around and kicked around and kicked around? So the best practice forums are a test. The other thing I would say to all of you is, if you don't participate in providing comments about the IGF, there is a public comment period where you can provide your input and your ideas. The MAG that gets synthesized, the MAG will meet for 3 days in December 1st through the 3rd. We will have remote participation, and we need to hear all these things from all of you so that we can then really take into account your input as we begin to plan toward the 2015. We should talk about renewal, maybe?
Well, first before we talk about renewal, I still want to get ideas for improvements, ways we might change the discussion at the IGF. For me, I was very glad to see a broader range of topics at this IGF. I helped do a little bit of that. We got some economics panels on the economic impacts of the internet, led to some really important discussions about how does taxation work for global internet companies, and a lot of really pointed questions about companies avoiding billions of dollars in taxes by taking advantage of the global platform the internet provides. And also a lot of discussion about the winner-takes-all discussion, winner-takes-all phenomenon that we're seeing. A lot of resentment that the internet is enabling one company to sort of control the whole social media platform, or because if you're nimble with the internet, you can take the market in a couple years. And people were feeling that there's not as much space for new ideas if somebody claims the whole space. And the hidden subliminal message was, and those companies are all American. So there was a lot of that kind of theme in some of the discussions. I think back here we have a question and name.
Thanks. Yeah, sure. My name's Carl Schoenender with the Software and Information Industry Association. Great discussion. I have a question for, I guess, Andrew and maybe Linda and anybody who cares to answer it. I've heard a lot about how IGF is supposed to be a place where best practices are discussed, and that's something I think everybody in this room supports. What's new here, at least to me, is several participants talking about how partnerships were developed, but it seems to me that sort of happens through serendipity, if you will, and meetings like this, that happens. But I'm wondering if there's a way for partnerships of this nature to be promoted in a more organized kind of way. Thanks.
Some more peer-to-peer interactions. Any ideas on how we might do more of that?
Sure.
Anybody else want to respond to that?
And I'll be happy to. I mean, one of the things that makes the IGF what it is the amount of time where you mentioned the hallway, right? There are very, very few international meetings where you get this mix of people together. You're talking about trying to find an African content person. You should have called me. I know some people, right? There are, but really, literally, there aren't a lot of global meeting places like this, and like it or not, it still is the human element that creates a partnership. You know, partnerships aren't signed by companies; they're signed by individuals who happen to represent different perspectives within a company, or a group of one sort or another, or a government. So there's, without question, just the idea that you can bring people together is a good thing. One of the things that was a little bit frustrating about this IGF was I tried, without a lot of success, to figure out who was coming and to get a better sense of the final agenda, which could be put up in real time, even with all the changes, because we have this thing they call the internet, right?
The web.
Right, exactly. The web, right. Thank you, sorry. We didn't, stuff like that I think we can do a much better job of. I knew some of the people who were going to be there, made a point of making sure that I got to meet them in between sessions or at the times when the sessions were less urgent for me to attend. I think that we can do a better job also of following up, as Marilyn said, with bringing forward some of the content and also some more information about who attended, because that's good news for me. If they show up and we get a little bit of a sense of who they are, I now know who to go to in the next iteration, or I know who to go to before the next ICANN meeting or before the Brazil meeting in João Pessoa.
Well, they did list all the attendees. You could see that list.
It was hard to find them beforehand.
It was hard.
I looked very, very carefully. Their website didn't work particularly well, and things like that I think we can do a lot better job of.
It wasn't as searchable as, that was my complaint, I couldn't find the 3 people from a particular company.
Right, exactly.
And the other problem was we didn't have everybody's Twitter handle. Because Twitter was a godsend. I mean, I was finding people that way. That's the only way you could find them out of 3,000 people. Just send a note saying, hey, let's get together, look for you by the baklava. Yeah. Other ideas on improvements?
So I have a quick question. We do have a place where you can sign up to be a resource person. Almost nobody does. What if we brought forward the idea as MAG members that we might also have a place where you could, under a category, you could indicate your interest in, I hesitate to use the word matchmaking. It's what, at the World Congress, we do that. But what if we examined the idea of having sort of a way where you could register that you want to meet other people who are interested in a particular topic?
Sort of a very informal birds of a feather, but also I think the other point, some of us push this idea that people didn't have to organize a session. If they just had a message they wanted to deliver, they could see if there were other people who were interested in arguing with them. Back here we had another suggestion for improvement.
Oh, I was just going to say, on the attendee issue, I would also urge for the next round to be able to search people based on either their organization, also government attendees. It was really hard to tell like different countries and be able to cross-reference where people were from. We were sending, the list of all these people around to our folks in Brazil saying, is there anyone on the list you noticed? It's like, it was very hard to be able to pinpoint different people. So that would be an improvement. Also, I would urge, how many people were on, I believe it was ISOC that sent out the daily electronic calendar in the morning? That was a godsend. I mean, I have never, any private industry conference I've been to, that was absolutely wonderful because you had it on your phone. It was color coordinated. You could touch on it and up would pop all the speakers, and then you could touch on their name and their bio would pop up, and then you would touch on something else that would tell you the description of the workshop. I mean, it was just absolutely wonderful. It was surprising to me how many people did not know about that.
Always the problem, letting people know what's going on. Okay, so we have time for sort of a wrap up here. Any other ideas on improvements for 2015? We do have 3 of us who are helping organize the program, 3 out of 50, so we don't have a lot of votes. Oh, David, okay.
I don't know about organizing I don't know about improving the program, but to take upon what he said about expertise and the questions raised about outputs. I think it works best as a deliberative forum where ideas are exchanged and people, and a consensus emerges that informs decision making. I think in terms of expertise and having true multi-stakeholder input, and yet coming out with the best thinking, I think there's a signal to noise challenge. So I think the two challenges that need to be addressed are the signal to noise challenge and optimizing the extent to which that consensus, that enlightened thinking that comes out of these discussions informs decisions.
Great way to put it, I think. How to get the peer-to-peer discussion going. Okay, one more comment.
So in other fora like IETF is self-selecting. If you're not an expert and you stand up and what you say is technical bullshit, you get blown out of the room. But in a policy room, it's just opinion. There's no mechanism to reduce the noise, as you said.
Well, there's Nelson's rule of listservs, which is the people with the least to say have the most time to say it. And we have to work really hard.
Generally post the most.
Post the most. As I said, they have the most time, they say the least. Okay, I'll come back to our discussion catalysts for one last summary comment, and I'll start with you, Natalie. If you have anything else that you heard here that you want to say yes indeed, or some other point that wasn't made yet.
No, there's nothing in particular. As I said, this is my first IGF, so this is, I guess it's sort of setting the base for me, and I'm trying to figure out what I personally would like to improve on. I think something, and I think this is a long-term objective, is to figure out how, if it is possible, to include the local issues in the IGF discussion. And I know that there's going to be some limitations, especially if the host country has different opinion from the civil society, as we saw in Turkey. But I think the Ungovernance Forum sort of provided a good outlet for people who were coming to the IGF who wanted to know a little bit about what's going on in Turkey. And I think trying to figure out a way, maybe within the IGF forum, not necessarily in a completely alternative forum, but to talk about the local issues would be important, because I think if we're traveling halfway around the world to some country, we might as well learn something about that country.
Andrew, any final thoughts?
Those are good thoughts. I mean, most of what I think in terms of recommendations, I probably already said. A lot of the things that would make the IGF a better meeting are just meeting things. More preparedness in advance, more information in advance, more money. Yes, Marilyn, more money. Anything that would facilitate more voices, but more voices with a purpose. I'll grant you that. I don't think that we should be choosing our panelists on the basis of just on where they're from or their gender. I was gender balance on one panel, and so I feel it personally. I know what that's like. They were very tolerant of me. But seriously, I think that's a big piece of it. I think bringing what we learn from IGF out in terms of the follow-up reports and things like that we're probably not taking adequate use of that. And that answers a question that a lot of attendees probably have, which is, did I get something useful out of this? If I have to go back to my ministry or to my, to my organization and say this was worth my doing. But by and large, there's nothing like it, and there's no other way for people to come together around in this kind of an open forum. And I hope it'll continue on.
If I had the time, I would love to sit down and pick out the top 10 video clips or audio clips, the 8 or 10 minutes that really hit it, that really got to the heart of the issue or gave a new idea. I think that's what's, there was one moment when Ellie Nome from Columbia gave this impassioned cry for the disruptive industries to stand up and start a discussion about how to help everybody who's being disrupted deal with disruptive technologies. And it was really, it kind of framed this really interesting debate. And there were a number of those moments. And if you could capture those and share them so everybody could find them, and the signal to noise ratio would be a lot lower. Final comment, Mr. Ambassador, veteran of all the IGFs.
Well, let me just thank you, Mike. Thank the Internet Governance, the Internet Society for putting this on, and look forward to a fruitful discussion after our next one in wherever the hell we're going in Brazil.
Okay, and don't forget, we'll be doing an IGF USA next summer. And how many people are involved in organizing that? If you want to talk about what we should do for the IGF USA, which is going to...
Trying to do the IGF USA in Brazil also.
Yeah. And there's lots of cookies and coffee still left out that way. Thanks for being here. Great comments from everybody. And thank you very much.
There? Good.